Thank you everyone for being here for this session, second session of this year's Network Forum. My name's Sian. I am the Director of Programmes for Network, Practice and Children's Participation here at CSC. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to a really interesting and varied session today. The objectives of this session really are to instigate a conversation about street-connected children's role in changing the narrative when it comes to their lives and their futures, and also to explore effective ways to engage street-connected children through participatory approaches in policy, in research and in practice settings, as well as kind of interrogating a little bit the distinction between child-led and child-centred approaches. If we go on to the next slide, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping and I'll introduce the speakers that we'll have with us today. So this is what I just went through in terms of the objectives of the session. Just to say, in terms of housekeeping, if you're, I'd like to ask everybody to remain on mute. When it comes to the question and answer session, and also we're going to have a breakout session for some interactive discussions. Obviously, come off mute in those moments. Feel free to use the chat box at any time during the session to put in questions, which we can perhaps pick up in the interactive discussion at the end, and also during the Q&A. If you have any technical issues, then please use the chat box to get in touch with CSC Network, which is who on this call, who is our incredible Senior Comms and Fundraising Officer, Ellie, who's running the technical side of the session today. I am the chair for the session. As I said, I'm the Director of Programmes for Network, Practice and Children's Participation. We're very excited to have Imma Delgado, who is coordinator of the Child and Youth Rights Unit at the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, with us today, who will be speaking from a policy perspective. We're also joined by Rigsar Wangchuk, who is an independent research consultant and shifting the power lead for Save the Children. He is based in Bhutan, and he will be speaking about a child-centred research perspective with an example from a project that CSC and some of our close partners and University College London have collaborated on. And then finally, I'll be handing over to Lucy Rolington, who's CSC's Senior Officer for Network Partnerships and Programmes and is also a child and youth rights consultant. And she will be introducing you all to CSC's resource pack for participatory advocacy, which is a really useful and comprehensive tool which we're launching to the network today, which we have trialled with some of our partners over the last couple of years and look forward to sharing with you all. Okay, next slide, please. So one of Consortium for Street Children's cross-cutting priorities within our strategy that was launched in January this year is that we will work to ensure that street-connected children are recognised as experts in their own lives and that they are involved in decisions which affect them. We believe, and as do our members and all of you who are here today, I know that we're aligned in the fact that we believe street-connected children must be active participants in designing solutions for the challenges they face in order for them to be effective. And many street-connected children will struggle to even conceive that they have rights, so that they can challenge violence or discrimination directed towards them. And we must therefore ensure that street children not only know their rights, but that they are empowered and supported with the tools they need to address this discrimination constructively and safely. And for street-connected children and young people to participate, to give an informed opinion, to be listened to and to be taken seriously, we need to help them develop the knowledge and skills to do so. And all of those of us who work with street-connected children have a responsibility to support them in that way. So an example from within CSC's work is our Street Champions programme. So this is a programme that has evolved over the last kind of 5 or 6 years that began through the work of Street Invest, who, as you'll know, merged with into CSC in 2022. The Street Champions programme was developed on the streets of Kolkata with our partner Cine, who many of you will be familiar with, and has since kind of expanded and is being trialled and used in other places. The approach is being applied in other locations with other members of CSC. Really, the Street Champion programme is about working with street-connected young people to equip them with the confidence and the capacity to be able to understand their rights, understand what they want to change, and to actually be able to take action to make those changes happen, including interacting with duty bearers, representing the views of their peers, and undertaking research. And Lucy will speak about this a little bit more at the end. So when we speak about children's participation, there are two main approaches that are referred to. One is the child-centered approach, and the other is a child-led approach. And so a child-led approach is one in which children develop and deliver activities on issues that are of major interest and importance to them, and then adults support them to carry it out. Critical to that is that those activities are developed and delivered by children. Child-centered approaches are those in which children are involved in activities in such a way that their interests are central and their voices are clearly heard. These activities will be based on needs that are expressed by children, not perceived by adults, but they won't necessarily be developing and delivering them themselves. So there are various models towards street-connected children participation and the participation of children and young people in policy, in research, in programming, and in governance. And this happens in many different ways and many different levels within organisations and also outside of organisations. Now, in this session, we will be hearing from, as I said, somebody in the policy space, which is Imma, someone in the research space, which is Rigsar, and then finally providing some practical tools from the practice space, which is coming from Lucy. Now, what we don't have here is an example of a child-led initiative involving street-connected children in the advocacy and research space. And we've tried to find one, and it's not easy to do. We'd like to explore it together as a concept. So when we speak about in the discussion later, we would really love to hear from all of you around any experiences that you have of child-led initiatives, what's worked, what hasn't worked, but also it's not an easy thing to facilitate and to make happen in a safe and meaningful way. And there are multiple barriers, both internal and external, to being able to facilitate that kind of work. And we'd love to hear from all of you on that. As I said, the breakout groups will happen later. So please, if there are things which come into your mind, make a note of them and save them for those discussions, because we'd really like to hear from all of you in those. Okay, I think I'd love to be able to hand over to Imma now, who is our first speaker. Imma is here from, as I said, from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the United Nations, and is a long-term partner and collaborator with Consortium for Street Children, as well as having a huge amount of expertise and experience in children's rights and their participation. So I'd like to hand over to you, Imma, if you're happy to go.
Yes, thank you very much. Many thanks for this opportunity to be with you. I really welcome participating in this discussion. And I would like basically to refer to two documents that at the level of the UN are going to be having and are having already a big impact on how we see child and youth participation. But before that, I would like to start with a little story that made me reflect while I was preparing for this event. So I was watching TV, and there was a big discussion on the prohibition of mobile phones in Spain for those under 16. And it was a very heated discussion saying, yeah, they need to be prohibited. And, many participants there. And when I was watching the discussion, the first thing that came to my mind was, why aren't there any 14, 15, 16-year-old being involved in this discussion? And it made me really think that we as a society, we have this adult centrism, this adultcracy, that we think that the adults know better. And yes, we have more experience than a child, but Do you remember when many years ago we would see a room full of men discussing women's rights and there would be a full opposition? Well, for me, this is the same. When we discuss child rights, it has to be discussed with children, not with adults, because it is clear at this moment at international level that child participation is a right of the child and it is an imperative. And there's no way of going backwards. So we all need to work towards ensuring this
Imma, sorry, I just want to, you're a little bit quiet. I just want to make sure everyone can hear you. I don't know if the microphone needs to be moved maybe towards your mouth a bit more.
1 second, yes. Do you hear me now?
No, it's still quite quiet. Maybe the microphone on your headphones.
See?
I think maybe just speak up a little bit. I just don't want anyone to miss anything.
Okay, perfect. What about now? Otherwise, I try without the headphones.
I think just speak up and that'll be fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. Thank you. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that, as you know, very recently, the Pact for the Future has been adopted in the General Assembly in New York, and states commit to a new vision to address emerging challenges. What is interesting about this pact is that it gives a role to young people in the construction of our future. It recognizes young people as critical agents of positive change, and it welcomes their important contributions to peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. It also encourages the establishment of mechanisms to consult with young people and provide them with meaningful opportunities to engage in national policy making and decision-making processes. This is a big shift from how we used to work before, despite the fact that in the area of street-connected children, we started working and consulting children in street situations more than 10 years ago, particularly in the work that we did together at the UN with the Consortium for Street Children. And at that time, I remembered we held consultations jointly with you with children in Ecuador, India, Morocco, and Uganda. At this stage, with the Pact for the Future having been adopted, we are moving towards a clear path for children and young people to be consulted and participate meaningful in all the work we're doing. So participation is a right and a practical imperative. And for example, when we had the satellite event during the Global Ministerial Conference in Bogota, it was essential that we had children like Rania and Priya participating with us, because we have to have the experiences of children that have the experience and that particularly affected, because it's them and their participation that should help us inform policies, plans, and interventions designed to address them. Exactly what we're saying in the Pact for the Future. And in the context of the discussion we're having today, this importance of changing the narrative, particularly when we look at children with street connections, not a victim, but an actor and a change maker, it is important that participation is integrated and that children are engaged in any discussions that we're having. In addition to the Pact for the Future, I would like to mention that we have another document at policy level that is key for the way we need to include participation. This is the guidance note of the Secretary General on child rights mainstreaming, which is a document that has been made for recommendations to the United Nations, but that of course it's applicable at a much broader level. The guidance note is grounded on the principles on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and its purpose is to ensure that at the UN system, we include the rights of children. It includes a number of principles, and I would like to refer to these principles. First, that child rights are human rights. Second, that child rights are everybody's business across the United Nations. Third, that children are distinct rights holders with a specific set of rights, which includes participation, by the way. Child rights are indivisible, interdependent, and interconnected. All UN action must give primary consideration to the best interest of the child. UN action must promote and include meaningful child participation. I wanted to get to this. And finally, that we at the UN, we must promote accountability and redress for child rights violations. So basically, we are now, with these two documents, both the Pact of the Future and the Guidance Note, have the obligation to include the meaningful participation of children as an integral dimension of the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies and programs in the UN system. Why? Because, as you said, Sian, at the beginning, children are experts on their own lives, and their meaningful participation is necessary for the adequacy and efficiency of all UN action. From this, what we learn from the guidance note is that UN action, and I specifically refer because it's for the UN, but this can be extended much broader, should promote and include meaningful child participation. Children have the right to express their views freely and be heard in all matters affecting them, and have the right to have their views given due weight in accordance to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. To this end, we need to develop collective capacities across the whole UN system to ensure enhanced participation that needs to be effective, ethical, and meaningful. I think that these are the key wording: effective, ethical, and meaningful. Defined by the Community on the Rights of the Child as transparent and informative, voluntary, respectful, child-friendly, inclusive, safe and sensitive to risk, and accountable. I think that these are the elements that for us, when we want to work with children and ensure child participation, we need to be guided by these principles. At the level of the UN, we work with youth advisory boards and child advisory teams. Child advisory teams are the child advisory teams that actually come via our partner, Child Rights Connect, because the establishment of child rights advisory teams is a little bit more complex than when we establish a youth advisory board, for obvious reasons, for safeguarding elements. And we also work with youth advisory boards that integrate into the work we do. We consult, they participate in meetings at international level, and they are involved in the development of our work plans. For example, we have different ways of engaging. Sometimes it's via survey, sometimes it's via direct participation. So I think that at the level of the United Nations, at an international level, as I was saying, it is clear that anything that needs to be done with or discussed with children and youth, or any rights discussions, need to be inclusive of the participation of children and young persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Imma. It's so inspiring and reassuring to hear how kind of deep-rooted the commitment to participation is in the way that you and your team and the wider kind of UN system is working. And I'm sure that there will be some points for discussion or some questions for you coming up a little later on that. Let's move on to our next speaker, which is Rigsar Wangchuk. Welcome, Rigsar. Rigsar, as I mentioned, is an independent research consultant, as well as being shifting the power lead for Save the Children. It's based in Bhutan, in a very beautiful place, very far from where I'm sitting. And he'll be speaking about Forging Pathways, which is a collaboration project between Consortium for Street Children, University College London, Gram Bangla in Bangladesh, Glad's House in Kenya, and Cine in India. Rigsar, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. And yeah, it was really wonderful to hear Emma's words at the policy level. And yeah, just to echo what you already said, Sean, just really reassuring to hear a lot of these principles, which I will be talking about in a research sort of a context. Yeah, so today I'll be talking about Forging Pathways, which is a research project basically focusing on how we can use child-centered research to inform policy and practice. I'm not gonna, I guess, spend too much time introducing myself because Sean's already done that for me. But my involvement with research kind of goes back to when I was at UCL while I was doing my master's, and then I wrote my thesis on street-connected children and their right to the city. So that's how I started to develop an interest in the topic. So yeah, just really lucky to be to continue working on this subject. So just to provide a brief outline, these are the kind of points that I'll be going through in the next 13 minutes that I have remaining. So I'll just get right into it. Just to provide a brief background on this research project. So basically it involves 3 cities of Kolkata, Dhaka, and Mombasa, and 3 collaborators that are based in these 3 cities. Cine, which Sean had mentioned at the beginning. We also have Gram Bangla, and we also have Riaz representing Gram Bangla here today, and Glad's House, Kenya. And these three cities were selected for their diversity in the context, the different kind of challenges, and also the opportunities that they provide. And basically, with this research project, the 3 main sort of key aims were firstly to advocate for policy changes, which would lead to improvements in the lives of street-connected children and youth. Second one was really to leverage on the transnational partnership and focus specifically, also look at COVID-19 and look at the challenges, the lessons, and the needs that emerged from that difficult period. And finally, to co-produce policy action points that are based on the perspectives of street-connected children and youth. I just wanted to provide a brief timeline of events as far as the research project is concerned. So basically, it kicked off with stage 1 workshops, which were conducted in all 3 of the cities by the 3 partners. The input from that workshop was then sort of, formed the basis for the first transnational workshop that was held in Kolkata. The first picture that I had on was also from that very workshop. After this, then the 3 partners went back to the street-connected children and youth and started mapping institutions and stakeholders that were relevant on this for this topic. Some of them also engaged their local duty bearers, which then led to development of the so what or the implication statements based on the findings from the first transnational workshop and the mapping exercise, which then formed the basis for the second transnational workshop, which just took place in June in Mombasa. So currently we've compiled all of the findings from that transnational workshop and currently working towards producing a final policy brief that incorporates the insights, which I'll also talk about in this presentation later. All right. Just to talk a bit about the methodology that was used, and this is the part that sort of really made me happy when I was listening to Emma earlier. At its core is that, wanted to design a methodology that was incredibly participatory and that enabled street-connected children and youth to express their lived experiences. So the methodology can sort of be based around 4 principles. The first one, of course, being the right-based approach. So a lot of the methodology is rooted in these sort of foundational documents of the UNCRC and also the General Comment 21, which concerns children in street situations. The participants that are partners sort of help recruit targeted diversity, not just in age, but also recognizing that there were street-connected children in different street situations. So some that were on the streets, some that were off, some that were on the streets, but now is no longer. So try to get a real sort of diverse mix of all of this. And also special efforts were made to reach out to recruit particularly those children and young people that would otherwise be or normally is excluded or marginalized for these kinds of processes. The second one around participation and inclusion was basically, that the facilitators were people that were already known to these street-connected children and youth, and where gender appropriate were relevant and needed. Also, the whole sort of project and the data collection and engagement with children was incredibly participatory. A lot of the techniques are drawn from CSC's resource pack, which our next speaker will dive into, so I'm not going to ruin the surprise here. And also, I guess, more importantly, to ensure that there was free, prior, and informed consent with all of the participants. The third principle is around cultural and contextual sensitivity, where the sort of partners really come at the forefront of this particular principle. Not just to collect data and engage children in ways that are appropriate to their context, but also to make detailed notes, particularly on capturing nonverbal cues as participants are responding to some of the prompts. The final principle was around safeguarding and ethics. So basically having a dedicated safeguarding lead, provision of a quiet area if the children ever needed to retreat or just to take a break during the consultations or the discussion. Of course, repeatedly emphasizing that their participation is completely voluntary and that they can rescind it at any time. And finally, with the data that we do get, maintaining anonymity and confidentiality or any other identifiers so that nothing that is said can be traced back to any particular children or young or youth. So those are sort of the general methodology, principles guiding methodology. Just to talk a bit about how we analyzed the data that we got, there were three main sort of approaches that were used. Firstly, just to identify key themes, looking at all the sort of findings and data that emerged through the workshops and the transnational workshops. And then, of course, to compare findings between cities to see if there are common challenges or differing sort of points. This would then help tailor specific policy recommendation to particular cities. And of course, most importantly, to get back to the participants to make sure that the findings and the insights that were gathered during the workshop feed back into them to check with them to see whether their perspectives and their priorities are accurately portrayed. All right, so let's get to the fun bit of this presentation. So I just wanted to touch on a few key insights. Then I'll talk about insights that are common across the cities, and then insights that are diverging across the city. So legal identity and access to health services came up as one of top 3 themes in both Kolkata and Mombasa. But of course, they were for different kind of reasons. So for example, in Kolkata, legal identity was framed around challenges of, not being able to access otherwise universal schemes and services that the government or local duty bearers provide. Whereas for Mombasa, it was a bit more, I guess, personally motivated in terms of tracing their biological family and relatives. On the health services, again, although both of them show up as, one of top 3 themes, the reasons sort of different. In Kolkata, it's focused more on the lack of mental health support and sexual and reproductive health and rights services at the primary healthcare center. Whereas in Mombasa, the children talked a lot about the discrimination and ill treatment from health staff. If we look at Dhaka work, sort of takes on an overwhelming focus. What we also realized was between the first and the second set of workshops, children had moved towards relatively quote unquote safer and less hazardous work. Of course, still noting that that's very far from the ideal sort of future that we all want to be at. One thing that I think stood out to all of us was the really long hours that children are forced to work in Dhaka, which of course hampers their rights relating to education and play. One thing that also came up was sort of the double displacement of street-connected children and youth, particularly when the sort of landowners evict the slums. Not only did they have to find and navigate new homes, but also work was often connected directly with it. So it almost leads to sort of this double displacement. On sort of the more sort of brighter side of things, what we also realize is the sense of international solidarity as the workshop progressed through time. So even among children, there was this shared recognition of this shared lived realities and challenges. For instance, Mombasa street connected children and youth were surprised to learn that Kolkata's children had the government's ear and attention on issues. And this is really important because it also points to them possibilities into the future. And finally, one sort of immediate output that came out of this research was that it helped create these new channels and platforms between street-connected children and decision makers or policy actors in Dhaka and Mombasa, because they had a chance to engage their local duty bearers. So even though some duty bearers, talked about existing programs that are there for children, these kinds of spaces helped sort of get that acknowledgement from these duty bearers that there are certain gaps because, for instance, certain programs are designed only from a disability standpoint and not necessarily from a street-connected children's standpoint. Moving on to converging insights across the three cities, one thing that came out quite prominently was just how diverse street-connected children are, even within that label of street-connected children and youth, not just at the city level, but even within individuals. We realized that their daily lives were, and how they use their times were very, very different, and that this helps us form sort of the basis for policies, because policies must acknowledge this heterogeneous starting point. We also realized that particularly in lack of secure safety nets, that street-connected children are often each other's safety nets. So we heard a lot of cases of them helping each other beg for food. This need was heightened during COVID-19, where there were a lot of insecurities around these kinds of basic needs. We also realized that this kind of led to forming a very strong sense of solidarity and unity among street-connected children and youth. A recurring theme throughout both sets of workshop was their education, their desire for education, health services, and safe public spaces. So these three sort of themes came out again and again throughout these various sets of workshops. And of course, the need to equip health services to address their emergent needs. Some other insights that sort of were similar was on this point of sanitation, how there was an intersectional dimension to sanitation. So, often street-connected children, were at the nexus of poverty, gender, and then inadequate, free, accessible public toilets, which meant that often female street-connected children and youth often had to walk very unsafe distances at various times of the day. In Mombasa, children also talked about, how young girls start looking for relationships because they're not able to fulfill their needs around sanitation. They rely on their boyfriends or partners to provide that for them. The other one was also the recognition that street-connected children have about the importance of engaging government and their local NGOs. One thing that came out was also the need to move, particularly when they were talking about disasters, from sort of a one-off event viewpoint to mainstreaming street-connected communities into disaster risk reduction strategies. The final few points on diverging insights across the cities. Some of them I've already touched on, so I'll skip the first one, which talks about access to services and the sort of different kinds of barriers that are there. Disaster preparedness, of course, in Kolkata, they talked and focused more on the need for long-term disaster management, whereas children and youth in Mombasa were focused more on the immediate impacts, and their concerns were largely overshadowed by sort of the immediate impacts of disasters such as curfew restrictions and the abuses that fester during those times. We also saw the importance of participation, decision-making, children like sort of coming to this realization more and more, where children in Dhaka and Mombasa weren't as demanding, I suppose, not demanding, sorry. They were, for instance, children in Kolkata were a bit more systematic and, sustained in their effort to engage with decision makers, whereas children in Dhaka and Mombasa were focused more on the desires to have their voices heard, which leads to the next last 3 points that I skipped one. Sorry, that was my last point. So I think I'll just end on this one particular note that one thing that was really heartwarming for me, I suppose, was children in Dhaka and Mombasa to realize that, as we were sort of sharing the findings of children from Calcutta, they were able to see that children in a different part of the world are mobilized and are able to make their collective demands for a lot of these rights that Imma had also highlighted previously, but more importantly, to have their voices included in the policies that affect their lives ultimately. So I'll just end on that note. Thank you. And yeah, this is the team, and here's a picture from the Kolkata workshop. Thanks. Back to you, Sean.
Thank you so much, Rigsar. So much really rich information there. Really great to hear about it. All presented in that way, and the methodology and the insights as well. So thank you so much. Please do, I've just seen we've got a question for Rigsar in the chat box from Ros. Ros, we'll come on to that perhaps in the breakout rooms or in the Q&A a little bit later. So keep that in your mind. I'll try and keep it in mind as well. I'm going to hand over now to Lucy, my colleague here at CSC, who's going to move on to more of a practical focus on one of the tools that CSC has produced that will hopefully be useful for some of you. Lucy?
Hi everyone. I'll just wait for the slides to come up, but joining you from a very cold and snowing this morning. So think of us all in the office. I'll just introduce myself. Most of you will know me in the capacity of working for Consortium for Street Children as a senior network participation, network programs and partnerships officer. But I've also, for the past couple of years and working on the side of this, worked as a child and youth rights consultant, specialising in children's participatory rights and participatory process, often in youth rights settings. So I've done some really interesting work in this space, including working on youth-led research, or Amnesty International's first youth-led research piece of work in the Philippines, and also in youth governance and getting young women in governance in the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts. And I mention that only just because there have been really interesting processes to do as a consultant, and a lot of the work of that involves actually, it sounds sort of counterproductive, but working with adults within those systems about kind of power shifting and decision making. So yeah, that's just some useful context today. But I'm absolutely delighted to introduce and shift this session into practically what we can offer the network. Delighted to introduce our sorry, can you next slide please? Our participatory advocacy pack. There you go. CSC's Participatory Advocacy Guide, which we're soft launching today to the network. We'll be sending around an expression of interest form, which I'll put in the chat, and we'll send with all the slides as well, for anyone interested in the training of this. And we'll talk a bit more about the steps involved in putting this together, how it's been previously used, and how we'll deliver it in the future as well. Next slide, please, Ellie. So what is this resource pack, and what are we trying to achieve with it? We are looking to empower street connected children to participate in advocacy predominantly through the resource pack. And our aim is to build on their knowledge, skills that they already have and empower them as confident, informed and effective advocates and spokespeople. So something here is about that children as experts in their own lives, which is a real pillar of children's participation and working in the child rights and child participatory rights space. So we're building on that existing knowledge that they all have to help them to become the advocates and spokespeople in more adult-centered environments with this resource pack. And Sian was particularly part of putting that together while she was at Street Invest. So if there's anything that I missed, then please do add in to the presentation, Sian. But we'll talk a little bit about where that came from as well. Next slide, please, Ellie. So some of you will have worked with, may remember the advocacy and action guide that we put together. This was done with Red Nose Day, I think, originally. And this guide actually built on the advocacy and action guide, which didn't have a participatory advocacy element of it. And the training for this resource pack was then adapted and expanding from Street Invest's Growing Up on the Streets project, which was done in collaboration with the University of Dundee as well, which I think probably people in the room will be familiar with that work. That training was also used, and we've Imma mentioned it already, within the consultation process for the UN General Comment 21, which I'm sure everyone in the room will be familiar with. And we've also mentioned a lot about CINE's Street Champions programme today, but the Growing Up on the Streets research project and the training that came from that to deliver this pack also was used in training those street champions, as Rigsar has mentioned. Currently, the pack's available in English, Spanish, Swahili, Bangla and Nepali, because that's the areas that we've kind of used and trialed the pack already, and that's been project-based and funded. But potentially, if there is interest, and I think crucially that funding piece, we can look at different languages, but those are the languages that it's currently available in and the areas that we've been focusing on. Next slide, please, Sian. Ellie. So what is actually in this pack? What we're trying to do with it is equip network organisations like yourself to do participatory advocacy with street connected children. So a lot of it is about activities and tools aimed at actually equipping street connected children, young people to build their confidence and their capacity to understand and advocate for their rights. So there's a real human rights education focus of that, as well as like looking at values and attitudes as well of the adults around them and of themselves. And the pack guides network members who would use it through this supported learning process. There's an intentional flow, as we've mentioned, and perhaps Sian, you might want to talk a little bit more about what's contained in module C of the participatory advocacy guide, just to kind of build us through that flow and the intentional thinking behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Lucy said, the guide is designed to provide a process that a group of young people can be taken through, but can be kind of tailored in different ways depending on the group you're working with and the objective of what you're doing. Now, there are components which are about capacity building, so understanding rights and responsibilities, as Lucy said, and also communication skills and activities to build confidence in standing up and speaking to duty bearers or others. But there's also a module which is really about supporting street-connected children and young people through a safe and interactive process of reflecting on their lives, on their experiences, on what they want to change, and on developing the solutions that they think are going to impact on those areas of their life they want to change. And that's the kind of the central module of the resource pack, which is called Module C. And has activities as well as taken in combination with notes for facilitators around how to deliver those sessions in a safe and supported way to allow young people the space and time and support to explore what may be challenging things from their lives, their pasts, or their communities, and to really turn those things around into actions and demands that they might want to make of duty bearers.
Thanks so much. I can have the next slide, Ellie. So the Participatory Advocacy Pack isn't necessarily new. It's something that has been in development and has been trialled with some organisations so far in the ways that I've just spoken about. But from a project perspective, there's an image here from a consultation workshop for the children's submission to the CRC. But the advocacy pack was translated into Swahili and used by a number of organisations in Tanzania in a project that ran a couple of years ago by CSC to prepare this children's submission. So it was used in that way. It was also used in Nepal in the Clarissa program, so child action labour in South and Southern East Asia, which a lot of you will already be familiar with the children's advocacy group in order to train themselves and also act as a facilitator's guide for the work that they were doing with that. And crucially here, we've got some reflections from the people that ran those sessions and worked with the child advocacy group. We can go on to the next slide, just about what they learnt during that process, which I wanted to look at here. Sorry, the chat's popping up and blocking the slides. So these are some of the things that the people facilitating those child advocacy groups with the resource pack were identifying as key learning points in that process, and something that we really wanted to talk about today as we do the soft launch. So just the importance of children and other participants that will be in those advocacy processes, identifying and therefore like owning their own problem and solution. When we talk about deep participation here, that decision-making power to participants. So actually handing the power over in that process that I mentioned before that I've been involved with in youth participatory processes is working a lot with adults to try and give that power away. I won't read all of these things out because some of this, the trust building, the rapport, the working in a really patient and inclusive way are probably quite obvious for a lot of people that have been doing this work. But this idea about de-learning typical ways of working with children and other people, trying to lean into that, and in delivering this resource pack, that idea, stepping out of the idea that we're, I think we're all experts on children and childhood at one point, perhaps when we were children ourselves, but stepping out of the idea that we still are now, and kind of leaning into giving that back to the children and young people that we work with. So it's that kind of cognitive, but also that cognitive shift that comes with viewing children as experts in their lives, but also that power shift that then comes with what comes after that. So a big reflection as well from this Clarissa piece was that with the right support, these children can undertake detailed research, critical analysis and actions, and that fed into the Clarissa research progress and process, which we can include a link to if anyone's really interested in knowing a little bit more about this process as well. But moving on to the next slide. We'll talk about next steps, which is probably the most exciting bit for the network members. So today we'll send around this expression of interest for potential training. And I say potential training just because we'd love to deliver this training on the resource pack for you to use to absolutely everybody, but we'll have to see what the interest is in our capacity to do so. We're going to circulate the resource pack to network members, so it'll be just within the network at the moment. And the idea behind that is we'd really like people to start to test out and use it in preparation for next year, International Day for Street Children 2024, 5 campaign, which is focused on the theme of children's participation. So using the resource pack to help build your IDSC campaigning and messaging and actions and calls to actions. So really involving children in designing that campaign. And we'll share more information next year and some pointers when you're using the resource pack on what it is and how you can kind of adapt that to your practice when we launch that. But for now, I will pass it back over to Sean. We'll open up the breakout rooms. If you've got any specific questions, I'll put the expression of interest for training in the chat as well. But we can go over any specific questions that you have on the pack, either as part of these breakout rooms, but I'm sure you've got questions for Imma and Rigsar as well. And we're just really excited to kind of launch this and share it with everybody, because it's been kind of going on in the background for a while as we've been trialing it, and yeah, really excited to see what you do with it.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you for presenting when I know that you're not very well. You did an amazing job. Hopefully you can take a breath now. So thank you, I really appreciate that. What we're going to do now, as I mentioned, is go into a couple of breakout rooms. So this will make it easier for people to come up with their questions, their ideas, and perhaps have some discussion with the speakers today. What will happen is Ellie is going to activate the breakout rooms, and you'll be invited to join a breakout room. So you just click accept and you'll go into that room. You'll either be in a room with Rigsar and myself, or with Imma and Lucy, and you'll see on the slide at the moment some of the questions that we as kind of facilitators in the room will be asking of you in the breakout rooms, and some of the things you might want to reflect on, but also very much free space for discussion. We'll be in the breakout rooms for 15 minutes, and then we'll come back together and give a little bit of feedback about what was kind of some of the points that were raised before we close. Just to say, if you are interested in registering an expression of interest to be included in any potential future online training on how to use the resource pack, which Lucy has just spoken about, then there is a link in the chat that Lucy has posted just to a really simple Google form, so we can register your interest in that. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Ellie now to make the breakout room magic happen. Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for that. We had some really pertinent and questions come up in our group. I'll just give a bit of feedback from the discussion we had in our group, and then I'm going to ask Lucy when she gets back.
I'm here.
Sorry, didn't see you there. To just give a bit of feedback from that group. One of the things that we touched on was the distinction between kind of child-led and child-centered. So just before we left the group, the inimitable Ruth Edmonds was explaining what child-led research means, like what it means for a piece of research to be genuinely child-led. And I think that distinction, and I think also the need for practical examples, so of actual initiatives which have been child-led and what they look like and what the process was, is something which I think there's a real need for. And certainly when we, as I mentioned in the introduction, when we were developing this session, we were looking for a really good example of a child-led initiative with street-connected children that we could invite to share. And it was a challenge because there was lots of child-centered, there's lots of participatory, there wasn't much in terms of child-led that we could say this is genuinely child-led. And that's not to say that people aren't wanting to do that. It's just that there are many challenges involved, everything from getting it funded to having the skills that are necessary to having the ear of governments who will actually listen to initiatives that are led by young people. So I think that's definitely something that came up from ours, as well as a question around what capacity building young people received in order to be involved in data gathering in the Forging Pathway project, but also in the wider, in kind of wider participatory research. So we spoke a bit about the resource pack and the supported learning and training that's in that, which takes young people through a process of equipping them with some of the tools, as well as building on their existing capacity and confidence to actually undertake research and gather the insights of their peers, and then to advocate based on those. Lucy, should I just ask you to feedback from your session, and then we'll open up to see if there's anything that's been missed and get some final insights from everyone?
Yes, we had a question from Rashi, which I think she's put in the group chat, was very specific to the findings for the Forging Pathways project. And unfortunately, it was me in that breakout room and not yourself and Rigsar. So I think she just put that in the main chat, and you can speak to the findings of that piece. Not so much a question, well, a question and a point from Morris, which is why you might have seen in the chat I just shared a link to something called the Overexposed campaign, and Morris was talking about the use of images of children and identify images of children, which I think links really clearly to children's participatory rights in that sense of, you know, we're talking about the work, but when we're working, how do we tell their stories and what kind of images and stories? And I think it, you know, it's linked. So we spoke a little bit about that, and I explained about the Overexposed campaign, which was run by Chance for Childhood. I put a little link in that, and we can send that out with the kind of wrap up resources. Explain that CSC had signed on to that, but prior to that, there might be identifiable images of children or stock images within some of our publications, and that in putting together the network form, we don't necessarily external speakers might use the images that they have within the group. So we'll have a little chat about that, but that's why I've linked that in the chat for anyone interested in that. And it does definitely link with participation, because children want to tell their own stories, and that means they might want their image used, or they might not. They want control of their own stories that they use. So it's an important consideration when working in a participatory way. And secondly, we heard from Rayesh from Grand Bangla, just about using, first of all, translating that resource pack into Bangla, which we're super grateful for. And then secondly, about using it as part of the Clarissa and then also the Forging Pathways program. So lots of really interesting points from Rayesh. And I think if anyone has any specific questions on that process, he'll be really well placed in this plenary session to answer them. But one highlighted there for me, I think, was just the importance of that kind of immersive approach and building rapport with the children that you're working with. And an ask from CSC for support in how they use that for IDSC, which I mentioned we'll be working on and giving guidance on that next year. So that is something that's coming. But I think I captured everything there. Felix, was there anything else from your perspective?
You pushed me on the spot there, Lucy. No, I don't think there was. But I think there's definitely space for more conversations around this. So I think it sparks some great initial thinking. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucy and Felix, for feeding back from that group. I wish I could have been in both. I can see that Rigsar has put a response to you, Rashi, in the chat box. So if anyone's interested to read that, you can see that there. There's a good point from Ruth on cooperative ethics, which the idea that kind of what is ethical in research is something that must be looked at collaboratively, and children should be involved in this in participatory work. So I think that's quite an interesting point in terms of young people being involved in the development of an initiative right from the get-go in terms of the ethics and the principles behind how, why, if something is actually going to be done. I think that's a really important thing to consider. Is there anything else that anyone would like to ask or discuss? I can see we've got an example from Kumba from Cities for Children. I don't know if you want to come off mute and tell us a little bit about your Child Lead Child programs, Friends Who Learn Together, which sounds really interesting.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kumba, and I hope so. There's no echo right now. You can hear me, right? Properly.
Just speak loudly and we'll be able to hear you. It's a little bit.
Okay, so I'm working for Cities for Children right now, and we are working with government of Pakistan, and we are doing these projects. It is still in the beginning stages. We are given 10 schools where we help. They are 10 schools from underprivileged, underserved communities, where we help the elder kids, and the kids are not even that you can say of age. They are like 11, 10, and 11, 12, 13 years old, who know basics of the things and everything, and they are giving a small training and a manual that how they can help their kids who are of young age, like the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, to how to, let's suppose, with their social emotional learning, literacy, and numeracy skills. And what happens is that it is a project for like a year where we have given them a manual of 12 sessions. And with the kids, the adult kids go to the classes. They have like every 2 volunteers have 7 kids around them, and we call them Bada cohort and Chota cohort. Bada means elder kids, and the Chota means the small kids. And what the Bada cohort always does is that they make them sit together. They have their whole opening things, and they connect with their kids and everything, and then they perform their tasks. They perform their the manual sessions and everything. And the best thing that we have is that, and we have performed this not only in government schools, but we have also performed in other institutes as well with the help of other NGOs. And the best thing that we found was when the kids, they were saying, the elder kids, they were saying, and they're just 12 years old, they're just 13 years old, they're having fun, and they come that, oh, now I know that I can teach kids and I can be an elder sister to these kids. I never had a kid. Oh, I never had a brother or sister. Now I am an elder sister. They come after the school to my home as well, and we talk about things. We talk, oh, I'm so sorry. Whenever I get excited, I start like being very animated. So, and there was this lady, this girl who was always the silent one, the one who never used to do anything, say anything. And she was the one in the end of the sessions when one of our projects ended. She came to us and she was so happy and she was very confident in herself. And she said that at the line, it is still stuck in my head, that she was like, I never thought that anyone in this world loves me. But now these kids, my sisters, they come to me. They were all, her whole team was female. So she was like, okay, these sisters come to me and they say that they love me, and they ask me what time it is that we can play together. And now I know that there are people who love me, and that's like that is a bit of a detail about it. If you have any question, I'm here to answer.
Thank you so much for that brilliant insight into that piece of work. And you can certainly feel and hear the passion that you bring to your work and how enthusiastic you are about that initiative. And also the example you give really demonstrates the impact that participation can have on a young person in their own sense of value, self-worth, their kind of understanding of their place in the world. So I think that's a really great example. I just wanted, we've not got long to go, so if there's no other burning questions, I thought it'd be worth us kind of returning to something that Imma spoke about in the first presentation, which was the need for participation to be effective. And I think it's really important for us to always be reflecting on why children are participating or being asked to participate, or why initiatives are either child-led or child-centered or participatory, and what that is actually going to bring to what's trying to be achieved, and to make sure that it's always being done for a reason and in a way in which the young people understand what does it look like for that participation to be effective. And the need for it to be ethical. So we spoke a bit about ethics and about the implications of that, and the need to involve young people themselves in developing an approach to ethics to underpin any work that you're doing with them. And then finally, meaningful. So it's, you know, we spoke about being involved in decisions which affect their lives for street connected young people. This is such a hugely important thing when we're thinking about a group of young people who have been marginalized and excluded and are perhaps among the least heard young people in the world, that making sure that anything that they do participate in, anything that they are involved in, and that they give their time and effort and attention to actually has meaning for them, most importantly, and also that they understand the meaning it has more broadly. I don't know if there's any final reflections. I've just seen one we've got here from Felix. Absolutely. So the follow-up piece, which I think is so important, and that's something which is spoken about in the preamble to the resource pack. We've got some guidance around how important it is to make sure that there is a follow-through, and that there's always a feedback loop, and that young people understand, so what happened because of what I did, not just a case of, oh, I did it and then that's the end. I think that's so important, and it's a really, really important part of the ethics of it. Priscilla, fantastic. You're in the ISW online training. I'm so excited that you've applied the approach from that training, which I know Lucy was involved in coordinating with Tajani and Khadija, our streetwork trainers online. Yeah, that's fantastic. Brilliant. And I'm going to give you another gold star for that. And is there anything else from anyone else before we just close off? Ruth, yes, being honest in our evaluation. I think that's so true. And I think we need to be honest about the challenges as well, and about what doesn't work well. And when things don't quite go to plan, I think we can't, the only way that we can learn and do better and make things more effective, ethical and meaningful for street connected young people is by doing that. So I couldn't agree more. In terms of next steps, Lucy mentioned about the resource pack. She shared the link for registering your interest for potential online training on how to use that resource pack. That link will be circulated with a link to the full resource pack document within the next week or so to everybody in the network. So please look out for that. If you're not the person that gets the network emails, then ask that person in your organisation to forward that to you, and to make sure that that's shared with your colleagues as well. And we'll be really excited to start speaking to you in the new year about International Day for Street Children, and how you might want to use the resource pack to work with young people in the run-up to that on the 12th of April, which is going to come around much quicker than we might think. Anything else, any final points from anybody before we close off and I thank the speakers? Okay, well, Imma's had to drop off. As you can imagine, she's a very busy lady, but in her absence, I very much thank her for taking the time out of her day to come and speak to us this morning. Rigsar, thank you so much for your presentation and also your contributions in to the many questions that have been fired at you about the Forging Pathways project. Thank you, Lucy, so much for sharing about the resource pack when you're not feeling great. You did a great job, and for your facilitating in the breakout room. And yeah, thanks everyone for your contributions, and look forward to working with you all on International Day for Street Children 2025.